All right, everyone, this is part 2 of our connective tissue video lecture. We just finished talking about 3 different types of loose connective tissue. Embryonic connective tissue, areolar connective tissue, and adipose tissue. And let's talk about one more. This type of loose connective tissue is called reticular tissue. And recall what I was saying about reticular fibers, that they are actually made of collagen, but instead of the fibers lining up parallel to each other, they are going to form a net-like structure. And this net is going to stabilize cells that are suspended within the matrix. And like I said, it's kind of like a net that's like full of fish. It's like you could squeeze the net and feel the fish moving around. That would be like the cells kind of moving around, and it feels like it could be fluid, and yet it all stays together kind of like a solid. So you're going to find reticular tissue in some very specific locations in the body, like in the liver and in the kidney. And I mean, if anybody has ever touched raw liver, you would know what I mean. It's like it's solid, and yet it's kind of liquid at the same time. So if you ever have a chance to handle some raw liver, then I highly recommend it. The cells that are in there are highly specialized. You're also going to have macrophages, which are immune system cells, along with fibrocytes and fibroblasts, which are the ones that are going to be secreting the collagen that makes up the reticular fibers. Okay, so that does it for our loose connective tissue proper. Now let's talk about our dense connective tissue proper. Dense connective tissue can be regular, irregular, or elastic. In dense connective tissue, collagen is the most abundant fiber. And so really it's the arrangement of these fibers that differentiates regular from irregular dense connective tissue. So dense regular connective tissue is found in tendons and in ligaments. And many of you may know that ligaments attach bones to each other while tendons connect muscle to bone. But some of you may have even experienced, like after like a twisting motion, you might rip or tear a ligament or a tendon, and that's not an easy thing to fix because ligaments and tendons are avascular. They don't have their own blood supply, so they're very slow to heal. But the reason why they don't tolerate those twisting movements very well is because of the arrangement of the collagen. As you can see in the picture, the collagen fibers that we have here are arranged parallel to each other, and they're very close to each other, packed densely together. And so they are going to be able to stretch in one direction but not in many directions. And that's why if you like twist your knee kind of funny, you are prone to tearing one of those ligaments that holds your femur to your tibia or your fibula. Fibroblasts are the main cellular component here, and they are the ones that are going to synthesize and secrete the collagen. Dense irregular connective tissue is pretty much the same as dense regular connective tissue, except for the arrangement of the fibers. So in dense irregular connective tissue, you've got the fibers kind of going, one way and then another way and then coming out at you. And that's what you see here in this diagram. So if you take like a cross section of this, like these fibers here that look like tiny little circles, these are like coming out at you, like through the picture. And so when you cut it, you're just going to see like the individual little fibers in cross section. But the ones that look longer, they're the ones that are running parallel to you in the picture. So you're cutting them like sideways. And so because they're not all lined up in one way, dense irregular connective tissue is able to be pulled and twisted in multiple directions. So it's going to be able to withstand stress from a multitude of directions. The dense irregular connective tissue is what makes up capsules that form around our visceral organs, the organs that are found in our abdominopelvic cavity. And they're also going to form nerve and muscle sheaths. And again, we're going to talk about the dermis a little bit later on in this unit, but the dermis is like the bottom, the middle layer, I guess I should say, of our skin. And it is made mostly of dense, irregular connective tissue, so we're able to like twist around and move around, and our skin doesn't rip because of the arrangement of these collagen fibers. Okay, and so hopefully you're still paying attention to your little diagram up here. We've got one more type of dense connective tissue to talk about, and that's elastic tissue. Elastic tissue is different from regular dense connective tissue because it doesn't contain as much collagen. In elastic tissue, you have more elastic fibers than you do collagen. And elastic fibers, remember, are going to have the stretch and recoil property similar to that of a rubber band. So they're springy and resilient, and they're also pretty tough. So they're going to be found in between our vertebrae. So they're going to form the intervertebral discs. They are also going to be found supporting our transitional epithelium, which we've already talked about in our ureters and in our bladder. And then it's also going to be found in other places, and you can read that on the picture. So if you want to pause in order to read, of course you can. All right, lastly, and one of our last objectives was talking about fascia. And fascia is basically a combination of loose and dense connective tissue. You can have fascia that is superficial, deep, and subserous, which basically means that it is going to be found beneath the serous membranes that line our body's organs. Fascia, here there are the three things that fascia is going to do. So this is definitely something that you need to know. It's going to provide strength and stability to our organs and to our tissues. It's going to help maintain the positions of the organs, because we don't want our organs like sloshing around all over the place while we move. We want them to stay in position. And our fascia is also going to provide a route. It's going to support blood vessels, nerves, and also lymphatic vessels. Okay, so basically this is, and I know that there's a lot of bullet points here. I do not want you to spend time memorizing all of this stuff, but all I want you to see in this picture is this. Like, this is just a little section that maybe is like cut out of somebody's upper arm. And you have the skin, that's the most superficial layer, and then you have muscle layers, and then you have the serous membrane that lines our body cavity. And so this light pink area, that's like the deepest portion of this drawing. So this is the body cavity, and then this is our serous membrane right along here that is lining that body cavity. But the point is that here you have superficial fascia, and this is adipose tissue. This is loose connective tissue. And then in between these muscle layers, you have other layers of fascia. And, you know, it could be dense connective tissue. It could be some more adipose tissue, some other kind of loose connective tissue, areolar connective tissue. So all I'm trying to say is that you're going to have connective tissue embedded in between the layers of tissue that make up our body wall, and together they are considered fascia. That's the point. And then the purpose of fascia is on the slide previous to this one, maintaining stability, stabilizing our organs, and also providing a route for blood vessels, nerves, and lymphatic vessels to serve the skin, the muscle, the fat cells that are found in a chunk of our flesh. Okay, so that does it for connective tissue proper. Let's move on to talk a little bit about fluid connective tissue. Let me move myself down here so I'm out of your way. So remember that this is still connective tissue, so it still contains the three components that all connective tissues are going to have: cells, protein fibers, and extracellular matrix. So we have cells that are found in a fluid. So where in our connective tissue proper, the matrix was more viscous and thicker and syrupy, here it's going to be more fluid-like. The proteins are not going to be in these rope-like forms that you saw in the connective tissue proper. Instead, they are going to be soluble. They're going to be floating around inside of the fluid itself. And they don't form these long rope-like structures, except in the case of blood where you have a blood clot forming. The main function of the fluid connective tissue is to transport cells and dissolved materials from one place to another. And so our two fluid connective tissues are blood and lymph. And we're going to talk more about each of these in later units, so I'm not going to go into too much detail about these. But let's just talk a little bit about what is the matrix of blood. Well, it's really it's plasma, which is mostly water, and then suspended in the plasma you have these dissolved proteins, and then you have cells. You have red blood cells, you have various kinds of white blood cells, and then you also have platelets. And the heart, as it beats, is going to push this fluid and everything that's suspended in it around the body. And then all of these things, of course, have different functions, which again we're going to study in greater detail later on. Lymph is kind of the same. It's not made up of blood, however. It is made up of something called interstitial fluid. So capillaries are the tiniest of our blood vessels. They're the smallest diameter, only 1 cell thick. And as our heart pushes blood through our blood vessels, sometimes fluid from our blood is going to leak out of these capillaries and into the surrounding tissue. So this interstitial fluid is not inside of the cells, it's kind of bathing the cells on their outside, on their exterior. But we don't want all of that fluid to kind of hang around because, you know, our body tissues are dark and warm and wet, and that would just be a really great place for infection to occur, for bacteria to grow. So instead, all of this fluid drains into our lymphatic system. And as the fluid drains into our lymphatic vessels, it gets passed through the lymphatic system and it gets filtered out by our lymph nodes. But anyway, the lymph is another fluid that's found in our body that transports this fluid through the body to our lymph nodes in order for it to be cleaned. And then eventually this fluid just re-enters our bloodstream. But our body wants to make sure that it is free of any kind of infection before we bring it back to our heart and our vital organs. All right, and so that's all I've got then for our fluid connective tissue. We are going to talk lastly about our supporting connective tissues, which include cartilage and bone. So I'm going to stop here and then I will begin recording part 3 of our connective tissue lecture video.